Okay, let's take a look briefly at a couple of real-world examples. And these are just mixes that I've done just to show you a couple of examples of how I've used compression in my own mixes to achieve various sounds. So this first one is actually a really simple piano vocal tune off of my latest album. And I'll give you a clip of what it sounds like. This is we're going to look at the lead vocal here, but this is the song without compression, just so you have an idea of what it sounds like.
Why do you stare at the sky? I'm not coming back for a little while.
So it's real smooth. I mean, there's a little guitar that comes in, some background vocals, but for the most part, it's just a vocal and guitar. I'm sorry, vocal and piano. Now, you may think that vocal sounds pretty good. I did actually get to use that with a really nice high-end preamp, and so the sound quality of the vocal itself is really good.
Why do you stare at the sky?
And then it gets over to the chorus here.
But I'm coming quickly. I'm coming quickly.
So this may be one of those examples, do we need compression? I think there's probably a little need for some on a lead vocal almost every time, just because it can still sound a little amateur if you don't add a little bit of compression to tighten it up. And that's what I'm feeling here. So we'll pull up a compressor here, and we'll just go through our 7 steps and get it like we want it. Okay, first thing, we're going to set the ratio. For vocals, I usually don't do a very large ratio at all, especially for a quieter vocal. So something like 1.5 to 1, that's all I'm going to do. For the threshold, I'm going to bring it down fairly low.
But I'm coming quickly. I'm coming quickly.
So it's I've moved the ratio down to 1.3 to 1 and brought the threshold way down so it's compressing at all times. Next thing I want to do is adjust the makeup gain to balance that out. So it's knocking off about 3.5 to 4 dB, so we'll bring that back in.
But I'm coming quickly. I'm coming quickly.
Okay, for vocals, I usually have a fast attack because I don't want it to punch through as much on the transients as I want it to be just all in all in your face and nice and full. So I do a faster attack. The release is fine where it is because it's the vocal, doesn't really matter. And I like the way this is coming out. Now, let me play you just before and after so you have an idea of why I did this. Because I'm not doing a lot of compression, but it is changing the sound in a subtle way that I think works really well. So this is without compression.
But I'm coming quickly. I'm coming quickly.
So not bad. Now with compression, all it's doing is it's just tightening it up a little bit. And it just sounds a little more in your face. Because this song is so vocal-centric, we want the vocal to be nice and up front. And a little compression can help bring that a little bit closer without sounding too close. Because we want the vocal to be full, but there's a dangerous thin line that you can cross between having the vocal loud and too loud in the mix and having the vocal be full and at the center and in your face without jumping out at you in a bad way. So this is what, let me play it for you again without compression and then listen to it with compression.
But I'm coming quickly. I'm coming quickly. I'm coming quickly for you. But I'm coming quickly. I'm coming quickly. I'm coming quickly for you.
In my mind, compression, I'm going to take a moment here just to talk a little bit more about compression and why I do what I do, especially on a song like this. Compression to me is almost like a wall. And it's as if the sound, if you listen to it without any compression on a vocal like this, You listen to it, and on the quiet parts, the vocal's right there in front of you and sounds beautiful. And then the vocal gets a little bit louder. I sing a little bit louder, and it jumps out a little too much, so you have to back away. You turn your head to the side, you back away, you turn the volume down, you do something because it went from being full and beautiful to being a little much and a little too aggressive and a little too loud. What I view compression as doing is it takes that sound, and as it goes in, as it's about to cross into that level where it's too loud or jumps out too much at you, then that wall is in place. So as the vocal gets louder, the vocalist himself is singing louder, but the volume that comes to your ears isn't getting that much louder, maybe just a little bit, because it's hitting this wall and it's being absorbed and spread out so that the volume doesn't all transfer through to your ears. So the vocal can stay right there up front and at the middle of the mix and right in your face. And then when he sings louder, the compressor just kicks on a little bit more to keep it from getting louder, and it has this nice smooth sound to it. That's what we're getting here. Listen to the long notes when I sing, what is it? The word I, that big long I. I'm singing it loudly and kind of getting louder as I hold the note out. And without compression, it can kind of jump out a little too far and get in your face.
But I'm coming quickly. I'm coming quickly.
Now with some compression, it's like there's this wall there that's absorbing some of that sound and letting it be nice and full without overwhelming you.
But I'm coming quickly. I'm coming quickly.
And a lot of what you hear when you hear professional vocal on a really nice sounding recording, a lot of what makes that vocal stand out so much is how they use compression on that vocal. One thing you'll notice as well is the consonants on the words is much more pronounced, which may sound a little over the top soloed, but in the context of the mix, it allows those to cut through, like I've mentioned before.
But I'm coming quickly. I'm coming quickly.
See, even right there, it sounds almost like I'm backing away from the mic. You've seen those singers do that where they back away from the mic for a second when they sing a louder note. That's their way of trying to actually do some compression of sorts. It kind of sounds like that here when you listen to the vocal.
I'm coming quickly.
And on the quieter part, I came back to the mic. That's really all compression is doing on this song. Now, the other part, too, is while I sing quietly for most of the song, at the bridge, I sing a good bit louder, and I still want it to be present. So having that compression in place allows this to be nice and loud without blowing up your face.
There's a war that's waging in my soul.
Okay, so that's gonna... There's a little delay there. That's funny. Okay, so that's a lead vocal, and a good example there. A lot of those same things, whether it's a really loud song, a really quiet song, a ballad, or a rock tune, those are really going to still apply. Before I close this particular session, I want to go to go to the complete other end of the spectrum and talk about background vocals. For example, in this song, I've got a series of background vocals, and this is going to apply to any sort of pad sound, whether it's a keyboard pad, a synth pad, or just whatever it is that's supposed to just hold out notes. Could be an organ patch, all sorts of things. I'll show you what I use compression on for those. Okay, now this is, let me find it here. Oops. Let's see what I've got on this track. Okay, so right now these are without compression, and they sound nice and full and very bright. And then by adding compression, we can actually just make them sound even more up front and kind of adjust where they sit in the mix, because being that they are designed to be sort of a pad type sound, we want them to sit at a pretty steady volume. And one way we can do that is with compression. So when listening to this, we'll do a really slow attack, we'll do a low threshold, and a fairly high ratio, and then we'll just have them hit that compressor fairly hard. We'll do a nice long release on this one so that the compressor doesn't really cut off when they take a breath and things like that. With a slower release, you'll notice when it took a breath, the compressor kicked in and made the breath really loud. That's not really what you want. So that breath, you don't want that. So one way to deal with that, because the coolness of what we're getting with the compressor is this has a nice, warm, tight sound to it. Listen to the highs especially. It's nice and sparkly. So it's a really nice, bright, kind of warm, crisp sound, and compression's allowing that by just squashing those frequencies quite a bit. But with the slower release, that breath comes through. So just make a nice long release, and it's always compressing. And that's fine because this is a pad. It's supposed to be held out, so that long release time is just fine. So that's whenever you have any sort of a pad and you want it to cut through a little more, but turning up the volume doesn't help, guarantee a little bit of compression is probably going to help you out quite a bit. Okay, so let's move on and take a listen to acoustic guitar, and we're going to use a different tune for that. And I'll open that up really quickly. Acoustic guitar is one of those things I rarely, if ever, will do any compression on, but I do want to at least bring it up and kind of show you what it sounds like when we compress it and why you'd want to use that. This song actually is not what I want. We're going to go with Another Day. This one has a more, the other one was a fingerpick guitar. This is more of a strummed guitar that I think will work better for this example. That's fine. Okay, so let me save this really quickly. Understanding compression video, so we don't change the final mix that I had there. Okay, let's find the acoustic guitar. Here it is. Okay, we'll just go to the chorus. Okay, this track, all it has on the acoustic guitar is an EQ. And I don't usually compress my acoustic unless it needs it. Now in this example, we could probably use a little compression in this song to make it cut through a little more. So here's what it sounds like in the mix.
Your compass is broken, magic 8-ball let you down. You turn.
Okay, so I don't tend to compress the acoustic, but I'm going to show you what it would sound like if I wanted to, because there's nothing wrong with that. Depending on what you're going for. One thing you may want to compress the acoustic for is to bring out the sound of the pick without the acoustic being really full. So one way you would do that is to get a fairly high ratio and have it compressing the very top of the loudness. So when you hear an acoustic guitar on a recording and it has that kind of percussive sound where instead of sounding like a guitar really sounds when you sit in front of it, it actually has sort of a percussive metallic sound. That's because of compression. So it goes from sounding like this to sounding like this. Notice how whenever the pick hits the string, it has this kind of a sound to it. That's really common in a lot of pop recordings. In this particular recording, it doesn't make sense because it's more of a folky sounding tune.
Your compass is broken.
And that sounds too aggressive. But in a more of a rock song where the acoustic is having to compete with electric guitars and really driving bass and really loud drums, it might make sense to do that to the acoustic. So it doesn't sound great by itself, but then when you play it with everything else, it actually has a chance at cutting through and being heard by everything else. So that's a really good way to deal with acoustic guitar in such a way to make it cut through, is add the compression, compress it quite a bit to where the strums, the louder parts are being compressed, and the rest just comes through normally. And that's what we were doing with the little bit higher threshold, really high ratio, and then messing around with the attack until it had that crunch that we were looking for. We looked at electric guitars a little bit. Electric guitars are tricky. They're a lot like acoustic guitars in a lot of ways, but if you're talking about really heavily distorted electrics, they sometimes may or may not need compression. We looked at that in, I believe, the video number 2 or 3, where we talked about what compression sounds like. And for electric guitar, it's one of those things you may or may not have to deal with if it's a heavy distorted guitar, because distortion is, in essence, basically it's just compression with harmonics and distortion added to it. So one way it distorts is by compressing it quite a bit. So you may not need compression on electric guitars. I wouldn't use it unless there was something specific that you wanted to do that you're going to use compression for. However, for a clean electric guitar, it's a completely different story, because then we're talking about we'll do this one, because then we're talking about something that has dynamic range to it. A really distorted electric doesn't have dynamic range, probably doesn't need any compression. But a clean part, that could be a totally different story. In this song, for example, let me save this real quick. I've got a pair of really clean electric guitars, as you can hear here. And you'll notice I used compression on these. That's what these two tracks are here, these two plugins. Excuse me. I've got the Renaissance compressor here. So let me just play you one of these. So these are supposed to be kind of just filler sounds to go along with an acoustic guitar and a vocal. Here's the context. But they don't really punch through the mix. And bringing them up in volume doesn't seem to help either. I'll push them up real quickly so you can hear that. Doesn't seem to really help. I mean, that volume was okay, but like certain notes would really punch through and be obvious, and other ones that you don't hear. And it's one of those, I need to hear all those notes. So compression can help with that. And so what I did is brought in a compressor, and this is a different looking compressor, but it's good for you to see this. And it's got all the same features that we've talked about. Here's our threshold, here's our ratio, attack, release, makeup, gain. It's all there. And so what I did is I added some compression to both of these to bring out each individual note. I did a fairly fast attack and a fast release, so it's compressing and then letting go, compressing and letting go. And the threshold's fairly high, so we're getting just a little bit of compression here. And I did turn it up quite a bit with the gain, but that's after compression. So now, instead of them sounding like this without compression, we add compression and the notes jump out at you a little more. notice how you can hear the pick on the string with each of those parts, the ba-da-bum, ba-da-bum. You kind of hear a little bit of a snap in the audio, a little bit of a punch there. That's because of the compression. And so now that's going to cut through a lot more. Here's before. Here's after. And here's that in the context of the mix, and you can hear both of those parts really nicely. They're not too loud. They're still down in the mix so it doesn't cover up the vocal, but they're there and you can pick them out because of the compression.
You are mine. You are why I sing this tune. Yeah, you are mine.
So there's just an example of electric guitar. Clean electric guitar is a whole different story than distorted. So that should give you a little something to look forward to next time you're doing electric guitars. Now for drums, we're going to go back to that track we were listening to when we looked at the 7 steps of compressing, and the song called Change. So let me go back and find that one. Here we go. And this one has some pretty aggressive drums, and just want to show you a few things of what I do on drums when I'm mixing them. Now, we talked about drums in one of the first videos, and we already know what compression sounds like on drums, but I'm going to show you settings and what I actually specifically use to deal with my drums. So for the first thing I want to show you is on kick drum. Now, this is a channel strip here, so the compressor section is right here, actually, just this little section. So we've got the only attack setting we have is fast or slow. That's it. And then there's a release, threshold, and ratio. And so what I've done here on the kick drum, for example, is I've set the threshold to really low and a really high ratio and then a slow attack. So the punch gets through and then the rest gets compressed. And it sounds like this. Whereas without the compression, it sounded like this. And with compression, it just punches through just a little bit more. It's fairly subtle, but when you're trying to hear for the kick drum, compression is what's going to let you do that. Snare drum is kind of the same way. We did roughly the same thing, but a faster attack on the snare, so it's always compressing, and you can hear that here. Listen to what the snare sounds like as we turn up the ratio. This is with no compression, then I'll add the compression back in. It has a lot more bite to it, and you hear a lot more of the snares and the sound of the drum itself. And that's a lot of what compression can do for you on snare. The threshold, obviously, you just set that where you want it to be, so where it's kicking in. And the release and the attack, we've got them both fairly fast, because in this particular instance, if we turn the attack to slow, it sounds like this. And you hear that snap. That can be a good thing, but when I was mixing this song, I found that the snare coming through and snapping through like that was actually causing a lot of clipping. And the snare, just when I turn it down, it was too quiet. I couldn't hear it. When I turned it up a little bit, it would snap through and be too loud in the mix. And it was just causing me all sorts of fits. So I came in here and clicked this button and changed it to a faster attack. And now it sounds like this. So it's got the full sound of the snare, but since it's a faster attack, that attack hits that transient before it comes through and has a chance to clip things. And so it's just taming that down a little bit so I can turn the overall snare sound up and have it fit in the mix without jumping out on top of things. So there's no rule as far as use fast attack always for this and slow attack always for this. It's really on a case-by-case basis. Some snare drums, I might use a slower attack because I want the punch to come through. But on this one, for example, I definitely needed a faster attack to tame it down. Now, the rest of these things, hi-hat, I don't usually compress. Toms, they're a lot like a kick drum, so you can use the same ideas you use there on the toms. But here's one thing I do quite a bit of, and this is called parallel compression. Now, I could probably do a whole training series on just parallel compression, but for the sake of this video, I'm not going to go too far in depth, but I'll just show you what we're talking about here. Here we've got the drums. And let me solo these up again. And they're all being fed into an aux called drums. And that drums aux is feeding 2 separate aux tracks, or that drums bus is feeding 2 aux tracks. So we've got it coming through this one. It sounds like this. Sorry, that's a little too loud. I'll turn that down. And so that's just the drums coming straight through to this track. Now I've got a second aux with the exact same signal coming through it, but on this one I decided to put a compressor. And what I've done here is you'll notice a really, really fast attack, so no transients are getting through. Really fast release, so it lets go fairly quickly. Really low threshold, a really, really high ratio. So basically the idea here is to compress the snot out of this drum track, and it sounds like this. It's just over the top. There's nothing that really cuts through anymore. Now, what's the point of that? If I put that in with the rest of the song, it wouldn't sound that great. But when I blend that back in with the uncompressed signal, it sounds pretty good. So here's the uncompressed signal by itself, just the straight drums feeding through this bus, and then I'll slowly bring in this really, really overcompressed signal, and as we blend those together, it sounds pretty cool. Since, as we've said many a time, the compression brings out the quiet parts and turns down the louder parts, we let the loud parts come through on this bus, and then the quiet parts come through on this second bus, because the transients aren't coming through because it's such a fast attack and a lot of compression happening, but the sound of the room itself gets brought out because we've compressed it so much. And the quietness of the way the room sounded is being brought out by all the compression. And so it's a great way to add a nice organic feel to the kit without losing all dynamic range. So the first bus here is giving us all the dynamics, which is awesome. The second one here is giving us more of an effect. We blend those together, we get the best of both worlds, and it sounds great. See, that one sounds kind of sterile. Then we add in the second one, and it suddenly sounds huge.
I'm changing, I'm dying. Do the colors look beautiful?
So that's how we deal with drums, which is a lot of fun. Let me show you one more thing that we haven't talked about a whole lot yet in the video, and that's how to compress a stereo mix itself. This is something that you're going to do probably not as much as you're compressing single tracks, but it's something that's worth knowing what compression does, especially if you get into mastering your own stuff, because you're going to at some point have to compress your own material. So here's a stereo mix. This is actually the final mix of this song.
Can somebody help me find myself?
Okay, so that's the final mix. Now this is what I sent to my mastering engineer. Let's say I was going to master it myself. One of the things I would do is use compression. So let's just take a listen to what compression does to the sound of a mix. We'll set it to a 4:1 ratio and bring the threshold down and just see what happens. Just listen along as we bring it down and see how it changes.
Can somebody help me find myself? When I look, I see somebody else. Just like the leaves of fall.
One thing you'll hear, and this is what you're going to get a lot if you start compressing too much, is what's called pumping and breathing. The compressor is coming in and turning off really aggressively, and you hear that in the audio. Listen to it again. It sounds like the audio is pumping, like somebody's going crazy on the volume knob.
Can somebody help me find myself?
You hear how it sounds like the volume is just jumping in and out at you? That's because the compressor is working so hard, and it's just doing too much. That's usually the sound of overcompression. Okay, so like I was saying, it compresses too much, and that's one of the issues you're gonna get. One way to adjust that is to mess around with your attack and release times.
Can somebody help me find myself? When I look, I see somebody else.
So it's not pumping or breathing quite as much, but as you can hear, it's got that really compressed sound to it. And there's no dynamic range, and it's starting to sound really flat. So that's one reason why I don't want to master things myself, is because I can go overboard fairly quickly and start doing too much. If you're going to master it yourself, ease up on everything. Instead of knocking off 12 dB, try just knocking off maybe 3 or 4, and just make small changes. Maybe use a couple different compressors in order to get that sound how you want it. But obviously, this is not an all-out mastering series or tutorial. That's not really the point. I just wanted you to at least see me do a few adjustments here and actually try it yourself. Pull up a stereo mix that you've done and go just add a compressor to it and mess around till you can see if you can get it to sound really good or better by messing around with the ratio, the attack, the release, the threshold, the gain, all of those things. It's a really cool exercise for you to do, and it's really going to help you appreciate mastering engineers and what all they do, because they compress the music quite a bit to get it nice and loud, but they do it in such a way that it's very transparent, the good ones at least, to where it sounds nice and loud without being too compressed, without having no dynamic range. And it's really an art form and something that I have a lot of respect for myself. So that's kind of the end of this video and the series of videos, Understanding Compression. Hopefully it hasn't been too all over the map for you. I wanted to show you a lot without wasting a lot of your time. I wanted to jump around to things fairly quickly so you can see a lot and learn a lot. And the biggest thing is I want to teach you, show you what I'm talking about, show you what I've learned, and then get out of the way so you can go open up your Pro Tools session or whatever system you use and start working on your compressor skills. So that's really the goal here, is to give you information that you can use and take to your next session right now. Even if you want to turn off this video and go start mixing something, you've got what you need to start compressing. So thank you again for purchasing these videos. I really appreciate the business. Hopefully this has been, you've gotten so much more value out of these videos than the amount of money you paid for them. And if not, let me know. I don't want to keep your money if you're not completely happy with these. So I'm happy to issue a refund if this wasn't everything you were hoping it would be and hasn't given you a lot of good information to take forward and to make better recordings. So thank you again. I'm Joe Gilder. Hit me up on my website, homestudiocorner.com. You'll find lots of free tutorials there, and there'll be other products and things in the future. So again, thank you, and we will see you soon.